So I think we'll move straight on to the next session, seeing as it's standing between you and lunch. I'm really thrilled to introduce, I know you needs no introduction, but introduction, Professor Yao Yang, coming to us from the China Center for Economic Research and the National School of Development at Peking University. I think it might be 20 years since I met Yao Yang here at an update, and we had some really interesting discussions over dinner about George Bush at the time. So I don't think all the questions will be about Trump today on a topic that he is presenting on, but I'm looking forward to some conversations about that, among other things. Anyway, join me in welcoming.
It's so nice after 6 years to come back to ANU. It's just like a long, long time. But compare with the time that I have been engaged with ANU, that's a short period of time. I think the first time I came here was 1998, probably, particularly in the second China update, I think, right? I owe a lot to ANU, particularly Ross and Peter, the big brother to me, right, over the years. So it's so nice to come back and see those older friends here. Today I'm going to talk about China's local government debts. It's kind of based on my ongoing research at the current time. There are a lot of problems in the Chinese economy, but I think one of the biggest problem today is just the local government debts. Okay. So I'm going to spend like 20 minutes giving my speech, and then I want to entertain some questions. Okay. So why Chinese local governments have accumulated so much debts? How big? It depends on how you count. Okay. So our estimation is that the total local debt is about 100 trillion RMB. Okay, it's huge. Okay, but in relative term, it's not that big, right? It's adding all the government debts together is about 100% of Chinese GDP. It's actually lower than the U.S., much lower than Japan. Okay, but the way those debts are borrowed is a big problem because much of the debt is commercial. Okay, so that's the problem. Why local governments have accumulated so much debt? One of the major issue in China is the physical decentralization. We all know that China has a unitary system. China is huge. I think that China is the only large country that has a unitary system. With such a big country, you have to rely on local governments to develop local economy, right? But then you have a centralized unitary system. So there is a constant tension in the Chinese economy, not just in current stage, but also over the last 2,000 years. Okay. To me, most of China's current problems, economic problems, and also political problems come from this tension, central-local relations. This is I think, an under-researched area, but to me, it's just so important. I think that's the most important thing in China, right? Many people don't know that China actually has the most decentralized physical system in the whole world, right? Local governments account for half of the government budget, but 85% of total government spending. Okay, many people say local governments, borrow because they don't have money. That's wrong. Local governments spend 85% of total budget. Okay, other reasons. Okay, but there's a constant tension because local governments have to develop a local economy, but in the meantime, they don't need to take the final responsibility of their debts, right? So we all know this is the so-called soft budget problem. Okay, so that's one issue. That's why we local governments accumulate debts, right? Another one more recently, it's because the central government rely on local government to stimulate the economy. This all started from the financial crisis, so-called 4 trillion RMB stimulus plan, right? To me, that was the right move, but the method probably should be improved, right? Ask the local governments to borrow, and then suddenly local governments' debts went up again, okay? And then local government also, as I said, have to develop a local economy, okay? So there's a huge need from local, okay? Many people say, oh, we shouldn't allow local governments to spend that much, okay? To me, that's a wrong suggestion or assessment. In the previous session, Larry talked about high savings in China, right? If you have so much savings, what do you do with the saving? You invest, right? Ordinary people don't want to consume, and also our enterprises save a lot. So who are going to use the money, the savings? You got to have someone, right? Spend it. It must be government. Right, so the government spend hugely at a local level, improving people's living standards and also infrastructure, right? Even if you go to, say, remote provinces like Guizhou, you see magnificent highways, magnificent bridges, okay? So that's how the Chinese economy is working. And then I also studied government promotion system. Over the years, economic growth has been one of the central pillars to evaluate the performance of local government officials, right? So that gives local government officials huge incentive to develop a local economy, right? And then much of their funds come from borrowings, okay? So I'm going to go very quickly have some statistics, but first of all, I want to make sure people understand the structure of local government debts in China. There are basically three categories. One is government bonds. Government bonds like treasury bonds in the US. This is approved by the central government, okay? So this is actually not a huge number, okay? The larger number is commercial debts. Commercial debts are mostly borrowed about, through so-called local government financial vehicles, LGVs, right? Those vehicles are commercial identities, okay? Which means local governments are not responsible to repay the debt legally, only legally. But in reality, of course, local governments are behind those debts. And in the market, there's a so-called LGFV belief. That is, market players believe that those debts are going to be repaid by the government, okay? Although they're commercial, right? Bank borrowings about 60%, the municipal debts about 40%. As I said, the total is about 100 trillion, okay? So it means 60 trillion from banks and 40 trillion from the market, municipal bonds, okay? And recently, we also have another kind of debt owned by local governments. That's government budget deficit, okay? So, regular government, the budget in China is about, I think this year is going to be 22 trillion. So half belongs to local governments. So local governments now runs a huge amount of deficit, okay, because of COVID, basically because of COVID. Before COVID, local governments didn't run deficit. Oh, not that much. You can just neglect it. But after COVID, huge, okay? And then it's just deferred payments to SOEs, but in the end, to private companies. Okay, that's I'm going to talk about this. So 3K. So we don't have exact data for commercial debts. So here the data come from Wind. Okay, and in Wind they only record about 40 trillion debts. Okay. So that's not the total debt. Most of it, I think, this come from so-called municipal bonds. Okay, so you can see this tremendous increase from 2014. This is government debts by region. So you can see the red bars for Eastern Province. And then there's a blue for central, then yellow for western part. So you can see the distribution is consistent with economic development, right? So in those eastern provinces, they grow their economy faster, so they borrow more. So that comes back to one of the causes, right? If you want to grow the economy, you borrow. Okay. This is by province. So you can see the same, like Guangdong, Jiangsu, Shandong, and Zhejiang. Actually, and also Sichuan are the largest 5 boroughs. Okay, because their economic size are the biggest. Then we have more data and almost complete the data about municipal bonds. Because if you issue municipal bonds, you have to register. Whereas if you borrow from banks, we don't have a good track of those borrowings. Okay, so you can see this. This is annual issuance. Okay, so you can see starting from barely over 1 trillion, now 8 trillion every year. Okay. Mostly interestingly, up until today, was 94% of the borrowings are being used to repay the debts. No new finance coming out of the municipal bonds market. Why? Because most of those LGFVs cannot repay their debts today. The only way they can repay their debts is to borrow more to pay the older debts. Okay, it becomes a huge problem now. You can see it's actually across the board. But the 10 provinces, Guizhou, Tibet, Qinghai, 100% of the borrowings are used to repay the debts. You can see how difficult now the debt issue in China. Okay. So the government, over the years, the government has tried to resolve the debts. Starting from 2014. In 2014, the government revised the budget law. The budget law, initial budget law, didn't allow local governments to bear debts. Okay, but since 2008 and a little bit earlier, local governments began to bear a lot of debts. So what happened? The central government had to surrender, revise the law to allow local governments to bear debts. Okay. In the meantime, the central government began this swap scheme. That is, allow local governments to issue long-term government bonds to swap commercial debts that the local governments had the direct payment responsibility. That is, local governments provide the guarantee. Okay, so that throughout 4 years, 88 trillion RMB was issued to swap commercial debts. Okay. Then starting at the end of 2017, then the central government began a huge deleveraging program in the market and also on local governments. Okay, local governments are borrowing with limited and also in the financial sector, P2P. What's P2P stand for? Person-to-person finance, which was abolished. This was never started, but it was huge. The impact was huge. I think the ordinary people lost probably in the order of 3 to 4 trillion. Huge. Okay. And then because of the deleveraging program, huge number of the private companies went bankrupt, right, in Asia because finance suddenly was restricted. Okay. Why the government started deleveraging? Because the leaders believe, the financial sector was too big, and that was not the way China should go. And the learned kind of a lesson from the United States. The United States was too financialized, right? And that was one of the key reasons why United States was hollowing out the industry. And China cannot afford it. That China has to be built on manufacturing sector. Okay. So even today, we have felt this impact, huge impact. Okay. Then, of course, then we got COVID. During COVID time, local governments began to borrow again, like crazy. The central government didn't put a lot of restriction on local governments because local government need to provide a lot of public service at that time, right? So then starting from last year, a major so-called comprehensive debt restriction program was announced. This time, I think Christine is going to talk about this more. Right? Local governments are asked to repay all their debts, 100 trillion. Okay, so 12 provinces were designated as kind of the key province to get a debt. Then they could receive central government assistance. Other provinces are on their own. They have to repay all their debts, clean up all their debts. Okay, that's a hard task. I don't think local governments can do it. Okay, but some provinces like Shanghai, I heard, is closing to the end of this program. Probably they can only clean up their local debts that local governments bears guarantees. Right? What about those debts that do not have local government guarantees? We don't know. Okay. But the consequences in the literature, in most of the literature, just the type of, if you borrow more, then you're going to have a crowding out effect, right? Right, that's the conventional wisdom. But here, this is my research. I'm working with some young professors on this. Local debt actually plays the role of financial accelerators in China. We don't like it, but that's the truth, right? The local government does not, in China, not like the government does in other countries. In other countries, government borrow, government spend on consumption. In China, local government borrow, but mostly spend on what? Infrastructure to accumulate assets, right? Because you improve the infrastructure, then the value of private assets increase, right? And then, particularly for private companies, they can use those assets as a collateral to borrow more money from the market, right? So eventually, a local debt also has a crowding effect particularly for private companies, right? So that's one thing. So in that sense, the local governments play like the real estate sector, right? So they have this financial accelerator effect. And also local debt increases private companies' credit worth through the trade credit channel. Local governments borrow money and then they put them into projects, right? Most of the projects actually are being carried out by private companies, right? So there are studies showing that if a private company obtains a government project, then this company is easier to get the finance from banks because government provides kind of backup, right? So there's a reputation effect over there. And when local governments face the leveraging pressure, then they cannot repay their the payments, right, in time. So they all defer their payments, okay? So in that case, private companies then face the pressure, this cash flow pressure, right? We have paper around this, so they're really significant. Then those private companies enter financial distress, okay? And they also conduct fire sales, particularly during the delivery period from 2017 to 2019, okay? So in the end, there was a huge macroeconomic consequence, right? When the local governments face a delivery pressure. It's not just the local governments, it's the whole economy. So I actually have a lot of doubts about debt swap, okay? So on October 8th, this is the latest news, the central government is going to do a 20 trillion swap scheme, okay? So after this round of swap, most of the local debts guaranteed by local governments are going to be swapped, right? Why I'm against this practice? Because financial institutions do not take any haircuts, okay? They get away again, right? In the last round, they got away. They were so happy. I actually talked with some of those investor banks. They were so happy. They got all the money back, okay? Then guess what? They reinvest into municipal bonds again. And the lending, particularly those big banks, lend again to local governments because they have this belief, right? Local governments will never default, okay? And local government budget will face a large burden of repayment, right? LGFV debts are commercial debts. In theory, in legal terms, local governments can say, forget it, we're not going to pay it. We go bankrupt, okay? But this time, they have to pay. They have to pay from their tax revenue, okay? And particularly today, I'm going to talk about this, local governments are in deficit. But now, at least they have to repay the what? Interest rate, interest payments. Okay, that's it. They increase the burden on local governments. So it's just contractionary. Okay, when the time comes, we need expansionary fiscal policy, right? And also, what about the LGFV that not guaranteed by local government debts? Right? Local governments guarantee that people estimate about 40 trillion. So what about the rest of 60 trillion? Right? Are we going to allow them to go bankrupt? I don't know. Yeah, the elephant in the room, the Chinese economy today, in the short run, yeah, we can talk about the long run problems, no problem about it. But we all live in the short run, right? In the long run, as Ken said, we all die. Right? Long run is a combination of a series of short runs. Okay. In the short run, we have to do something. The consumption, yeah, you can talk about consumption, but consumption is a long-term problem. In the short run, there are two elephants in the room. One is the housing sector. I'm not going to talk about housing sector today. The other one is local government budget deficit, not the debts, right? Debts you can see, you can always what? Borrow new money to repay the old money. We can get by. But what about the local government's deficit? Huge. right? Ranging from 4 trillion by Chong-en's estimate to 6 trillion. That's Li Daokui's estimate. Both are from Tsinghua University, right? That's huge. What are the consequences? Local governments are cutting salaries, cutting spending, okay, and deferring payments, and increasing non-tax revenue. Okay, that's a series, I tell you. Okay, they go around, right, and they get long tax revenue. I'm not going to name it, right? Long tax revenue increased by 13.5% over the first 9 months this year, despite tax revenue declined by 5.3%. Okay, those are the number actually published by Ministry of Finance. All right, so we are talking about the confidence of private companies. When you see those data, how can you talk about the confidence? Okay, you know, government official go to your company and say you pay without any reason. Okay, so this is so serious. Suggestions: bail out local governments is the first priority, no more than that. Okay, it's so serious. COVID was a national emergency, right? In any other countries, the central government took all the bill. But in China, local governments took all the bill. Okay, right? But of course, local governments didn't have that kind of money. What did they do? They actually basically cheated the private companies to go into the business. Okay, and in the end, they couldn't repay them. Almost every private company I talked to said, "Oh, the government owe me some money." Okay, so demand for local governments account for 30% of China's total domestic demand. Okay, the housing sector at least 15%, at least. Adding together, that's 45%. I think close to half of China's total demand. So you talk about the consumption, that's a peanut. Okay, this the housing sector, the government sector are the two elephants in the room. I don't know why people just say we don't see them. Okay, they're elephants. Okay, so I think a sense of urgency has to be there. Trump is going to add 40 to 60% tariff on Chinese exports. Estimates tell us this is going to bring down Chinese economy by 2% maximum. But even 1%, that's a large number in China today, right? So the Chinese government has to feel this urgency, has to put forward some decisive stimulus package next year, right? It's not a debt swap. It has to be physical, real physical stimulus. And the first thing is to bail out the local governments, right? So I strongly recommend the government to issue, central government to issue government bonds in the amount of 4 to 5 trillion to bail out the local government. Okay, so let me stop here and probably entertain some questions.
Thank you. I'm going to take 3 or 4 questions from anyone who really wants to ask one, and I might let. Well, I'll start just with the one and see how we go. I'm going to stop at 4 maximum.
Thank you, Professor. So from my view, that China is back into the balancing session. So my question is quite simple. Can we predict that the Chinese government will have a very radical fiscal policy in next March on the meeting of the People's Congress?
The problem is that the government just started this debt restructuring problem, right? The whole direction is to control debt. Okay, so that's why, despite our calls over the last 2 years for the government to have real stimulus, physical spending, has been really hard. Okay, so I hope the Trump terror can become kind of morning call to the Chinese government. It's time for the government to do some real physical stimulus.
Speech. Actually, my question just to follow his and follow your suggestions. Yes, I think that given Chinese government capacity, bail out the local government is, I think they can do that. But afterward, what's afterwards? You said that, is there any, wrong debt or black debt or good debt or bad debt? Or what are the, even local government's very important role in Chinese growth? So what should be the right source of revenue for the local government in the future? Bailout is okay, but what the
I understand, but let's not worry about that. Right? This is always the objection to our course. What about that? What about after? What about after? We live today. We live today, right? Solve this problem first. Let's think about the letter. Okay, that's long-term issue. You're not going to solve it overnight, right? In China, people always say, "Oh, you can do that. What about that? What about after? What about after?" Think about today. We cannot go by today. We're going to die, right? You think about the afterlife, right? I can talk a little bit about how to prevent the new death. Actually, the third plenum of 20th Party Congress already had a reform plan for that. I think that's the right direction. That is for every level of the government to create a balance sheet of assets, which means in the future, all the debts are going to be transparent. I think that's the ultimate way to control local government debts.
You should not worry about the government debt in the future, even in the future. Do not worry, it's not a real problem. As long as the economy grows, right? Anyway.
Well, I don't think that's not a problem. The way of borrowing is a problem because there's no discipline, no transparency, right? We have to change that.
What a fascinating presentation. My question is, what do you think these government debts have an impact on the green transition and the green economy in China? Do we see all the differences between the provinces that you just showed? And the second question is a third element the youth unemployment in China, or is that not a big problem?
Well, actually, those debts are good for green transition. And much of the money has been used for green transition, I think, in many provinces. I don't have data, but I suppose that's the way how government spends at least a part of the money. Youth unemployment cannot be solved, okay, without reviving the economy. Right? The government always say, "Oh, we're going to have a policy to increase employment." No way, right? If the economy is bad, how can you increase employment? Okay, so this is two sides of one coin.
Another question, Larry.
Yeah, thanks for this nice presentation. So my question is that I'm interested in looking at this data from an institutional perspective. So China's data not really about size, but more related to the discipline of the government behavior. So in economic metric model always empower this government in a temporary council. But in China's context, I would say the government is really too powerful
no one can tie down the government hands. So in China's legal system, so how to you look at the future, how the government to tie down their hands by themselves? Where
The last one, right? As this is yeah, every government has to make the balance sheet public. Okay, that's going to increase the power of local people's Congress. I believe once you present the people's delegates with this huge debt, they're going to vote no. Right? And it also has a kind of a public image issue over there. Why the Chinese central government always say, well, our deficit is not going to be more than 3% of GDP, right? That's because of the international standard, right? About that, there is a physical problem, right? Moody is going to downgrade China's rating, okay? So I think there are ways to improve that.
Okay, we'll have more time to unpack that. I think probably with some contentious discussions later on in the day. Thanks very much. You always.
Thank you.